There's a new Bureau Files video.
How I would destroy Gondor. It should be no surprise that this is a video that exists on this channel. For over the amount of time that this channel has existed, we have dipped our toes into different aspects of Lord of the Rings, whether it's assaulting or defending Helm's Deep, whether it's defending Minas Tirith. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, and I find that Peter Jackson's movie portrayals are rather enjoyable from playing a armchair general. Someone has to fight for my virginity, and it's gonna be me. Also, times have been tough. I had to sell my beard to pay rent. In the How I Would Defend Minas Tirith video, it really boiled down to a lack of trenches and being prepared and capitalizing on choke points in the city. And also how Gondor's infantry was really kind of like wet noodle maxing a bit. In this video, there won't be any defenses prepared by Gondor whatsoever, and we're going to be attacking them how they were portrayed in the movie, thank God. Oh my God, if they just had some trenches, this would have been a much harder video. Now, of course, before we dive into this, we have to take a look at the factions and forces on each side of the aisle. On our side, we have 200,000 troops. 80,000 light infantry orc trash, basically Sauron's cannon fodder. 50,000 regular infantry orcs, 15,000 elite heavy infantry, probably the most dangerous infantry in the entire realm, the Uruk-hai. Now, I'm not sure if we got reinforced from Isengard, because if we're going off this scenario, then we would have had reinforcements of the Uruk-hai winning at Helm's Deep. And then this kind of ties into the scenario of us taking Minas Tirith. That's kind of what the premise is. So a lot of this video is built upon the idea that we succeeded in destroying Helm's Deep, meaning that Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas all died, and then Gandalf and Éomer kind of beat feet out of there and didn't assault us. I should have clarified that sooner. 15,000 Uruk-hai infantry. This is an important number to dial in. I'm not sure exactly where we got the 15,000 number, but I would guess it would probably be closer to an 8,000 number if we took some, casualties taking Helm's Deep, if we lost like 2,000 guys of that 10,000 man. 10,000 orc archers, 500 trolls, 100 siege trolls with body armor, 150 on the Grond crew members. Grond is the big siege hammer. 500 catapults and siege engines. 15,000 Haradrim southern infantry, basically the elephant riders. 18 Mamukel war beasts, also known as Oliphants. 7,000 Easterling halberdiers, 5,000 Haradrim cavalry, 250 black Númenórean officers, 9 Nazgûl, including the Witch King and their black wings. We're going to expand more on this, but let's go over the infantry Gondor has. 2,500 Gondor spearmen and 2,000 Gondor swordsmen, making up the best infantry in the world for the realm of men. 800 Ithilien rangers, 1,200 Gondor archers, 1,500 citadel guards, 100 stone throwers and trebuchets. I'm a little shaky on that number, but we'll stick with the script. 300 cavalry knights and 100 engineers. Now, this is not the only force we are up against, because there are 6,000 Rohirrim riders floating about out there. If we're playing off the last video scenario where we took Helm's Deep, then this force will not be led by King Theoden, because he would have died defending Helm's Deep. So it's being led by Éomer, and he's got all of his cavalry out there on our flank somewhere, out in the ether, when we got to take account for that. There's also a third force that we have to worry about, the dead men of Dún Harrow. Now, in this scenario, if Aragorn is dead, then we don't have to worry about him bringing back the dead men of Dún Harrow. This is a massive detail, because those ghosts are like some ex machina, you're gonna win the day BS. Like, how do you fight an army of ghost soldiers? You swing and it's gonna go right through them and they just kill you.
Who you gonna call? Ghostbusters!
Us destroying Helm's Deep and killing Aragorn is a massive, massive deal, because without him being dead, there would have been no chance that we could have taken Minas Tirith. So really, the video is kind of like, we got this one in the bag, but we're gonna go over some more technicality. So in the Defense of Minas Tirith video, we talked about the Gondor infantry, and one big complaint I had with that movie is Peter Jackson's portrayal of the Gondorian infantry. So in the world of men, we have Rohan, who are like the horse lords, master of the plains, these kind of like Viking-esque, Mongolian, heavy cavalry of Middle Earth. There's like the whole mashup of these different cultures into one, and it's fun. I like that. Now with Gondor, their strength seems to be like in a more conventional, classical European of medieval era type vibe. You know, a lot of plate armor, these heavy knights. They may have good cavalry, but they're not as like nimble and maneuverable as say Rohan's cavalry, which seems like it's not as heavily armored. Like you can definitely tell in the movie, the Gondor cavalry seems much more like a traditional heavy cavalry role, like shock cavalry. Now, their infantry in particular, I feel like Peter Jackson portrayed them in a disservice because every time they would come across like these orcs that they should have just been mopping up, like just regular run-of-the-line orcs, these orcs would like kill them in ways that I was like, man, it's kind of cheesy. Like these orcs that they're fighting aren't like the cream of the crop. It's not like they're fighting Uruk-hai. Like, I always think of the scene from Osgiliath where they're crossing in the Higgins boats that aren't Higgin boats, and that one orc archer dispatches a Gondorian like through the plate armor, and it's like, dude, what was the point of all that armor if some orc's arrow from some little rinky-dink bow is gonna take you out? There's a reason you wear armor, and it's because arrows can't go through them. You could have a 160-pound war bow, and it's not gonna go through good armor. Ask me how I know! Who the f is texting me? The Gondor infantry regular soldier could probably take on 5 of the smaller orcs, like in a good fatal funnel. Like the really only chance the orcs have is flanking these guys and then just like kind of crab shell killing them in their vulnerable spots of armor. Probably like how a medieval longbowman at the Battle of Agincourt would kill a French knight after dismounting him off of his horse. Like they'll kind of like surround him and then take turns finding and probing a weak spot. Like one-on-one, that knight's gonna kill you if you're an archer. But if you got 5 of your archer buddies and you all have like knives, you can get around that guy and flank and pull him down and start crab shell stabbing him. So that's kind of how I imagine the orcs to the Gondoran infantry. Now, a big threat to the Gondor infantry would be our Uruk-hai. The Uruk-hai are terrifying. I think for the movie, they got like a bunch of rugby players to play the Uruk-hai. Just these stout dudes, you know, really scary looking in all that armor, and they have their own version of plate armor, so that kind of battle would be pretty gnarly. And I'm kind of mad we got robbed of seeing the Uruk-hai fighting Gondor. So in this scenario, you get it. You're welcome. I did you a service. You may like and subscribe, and you may unsubscribe later in the video when I talk about trenches. Gondor's troops all reside in Minas Tirith, which is the capital. And fun fact, it did not used to be the capital. I feel like I'm a news anchor when I say it that way. Osgiliath was actually the capital of Gondor back in the day until Minas Ithil got captured by Sauron. Minas Ithil being the sister city of Minas Tirith, which used to be called Minas Anor, Tower of the Sun. Minas Tirith and Minas Ithil were both fortresses protecting the entryway towards Osgiliath, and until Sauron captured Minas Ithil, turning it into Minas Morgul, pretty much they just turned Minas Tirith into the new capital because it was like more fortified. One of you in the comments actually pointed this out. Probably the worst username for saying this ever. It's like Elizhovsky79.
Fun bit of trivia. The reason why Minas Tirith is built like a hard-on is that because it is a fortress. Minas Tirith, originally Minas Anor, Tower of the Sun, and sister city Minas Morgul originally was...
I'm not fact checking that. I'm just gonna trust you guys because I know some of you out there are way more turbo nerds for Lord of the Rings than I will ever be. And God bless you. You're my kind of people, honestly. Like if I was at a social function and I saw you guys and you brought up Lord of the Rings, dude, I would just let you talk to me about Lord of the Rings. I'd let you just, all the details. I have friends like that in real life. I know the cut of the cloth that you come from. And I actually dig it. You're a good time. Anyways, Minas Tirith. Minas Tirith as a fortress is actually very impressive. You have like, what, 7 layers, all going up vertical with a massive amount of choke points, and you have a bunch of siege artillery and fatal funnels to capitalize on for shooting down into hordes coming into your fortress. As far as being an attacking force, it is actually quite a terrifying idea and a daunting thing to look at, but thank God we have like a 200,000 plus strong army to take this thing on. I'm actually feeling pretty confident going into this one, even dealing with the 6,000 strong Rohirrim cavalry force out on our flank. It's not worrying me too much. The only thing I'm worried about is logistical supply trains, but we'll get there. Let me cook! The biggest issue with Sauron's approach to taking Minas Tirith is that he tried to speedrun the process. This is by and far a bad idea when it comes to a siege, because it's not even really a siege technically. He pretty much rolled up and just started an assault. Siege warfare, and you know, as fun as it sounds to be a medieval archer or a medieval knight, thank God I don't live during that period. Because realistically, I would probably be the dude that got dysentery, crap my brains out, and then die. Sieges are pretty brutal affairs, okay? If you have a siege, you kind of like roll up and you give them an option like, hey, do you want to surrender now and we'll spare this city? Or you hold out and I can't control my troops once they get in. There's kind of like a historical thing where if you're a soldier in an attacking army in sieges, one of your rewards is kind of being let off the leash for as long as you could be until they restored order, and you get to like kind of pillage and loot the entire city. It's definitely not a fun fact of history, but it's a very historical thing that happened. Being the civilian population in a siege would suck. Man, supplies are running low. Why do my kids keep dying from starvation? So with the siege as an attacker, you have to commit more troops, which means you have to have more logistics, meaning you have to have some friendly supply chain nearby that can keep your guys fed. And you have to think about this going on for not just weeks, months, but potentially years, or even in some cases, decades. The Siege of Ceuta. It lasted from 1694 to 1720, 26 years, longer than some of you have been alive. Not me, I'm Unk status now. It actually lasted longer than some American marriages, which is 21 years, by the way, on average. Some of you know this because you come from broken homes. This is really the crux of the issue that I have with Sauron's plan, is that he didn't go into this with the idea of a long siege, and he was going in with the idea of a massive assault. Now, when you have 200,000 guys, the idea of rolling up and assaulting it isn't the worst thing ever. But you also have 200,000 guys, so you have some options. Now, this is my usual spot where I say this is all, of course, based off of Peter Jackson's movies and not the books, because it does play out differently in the books, which I do appreciate, but we're sticking with the movies. I have to stress this because you guys are gonna bring up the books in the comments, which is fine. Please do it. I don't care. I appreciate your guys' attention to detail. So this does bring up an interesting question with the scenario that we have so far. So in the movie realm, I believe Sauron rushed the army to go attack Gondor because he saw Aragorn through Palantir and was like, oh crap, I gotta go kill Aragorn. So he sends the army out to go assault Minas Tirith. If Aragorn doesn't survive Helm's Deep, does that slow down Sauron's preparedness and give him more time to approach Minas Tirith with a better and clearer head? Potentially, yeah, but we're already kind of playing with the scenario of the army that we have on hand, with the fact that we destroyed a lot of the key players and took Helm's Deep already, so we're gonna stay on path with that. Now, a big threat that we have to our flank with this whole thing is the Rohirrim cavalry. And gentlemen, can you take a wild guess at what a good anti-cavalry deterrent is? Besides an M240 Bravo, which we don't have in this scenario, it's ditches, it's trenches, it's digging up earth that would slow down and break up a cavalry charge. That's the best defense, and that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna sound like a broken record, like one of those historical experts that's always like critiquing movie battles, and it's like, realistically, they would have dug trenches. That's the best way. It makes sense. Okay? It makes perfect sense. All you have to do is a little bit of, because all you have to do is do a little elbow grease, dig up some earth, and you have a better chance of defending yourself from a big old horse and an angry Rohirrim rider. They got these big ass trolls. You could probably make some big ass shovels and pickaxes while they're just chilling before they assault. Put them to work. I know everyone's like, oh, I'm gonna have armor and a sword. What if you brought a shovel? What if your little punk ass brought a shovel to this? Have you ever thought about being useful? I'm not mad at you guys. I'm mad at the scenario. Now, with this army, before we even think of touching the gate, of lobbing an arrow, of sending a big old boulder at Minas Tirith, we're gonna roll up, we're gonna assess the situation. We're gonna think, okay, perhaps we'll get a perimeter going. Once that perimeter is in place around Minas Tirith, we're gonna take every non-essential fighter and start digging some defenses around us to give us a good chance at repelling any army that's coming, mainly the Rohirrim cavalry showing up. Oh God, is it whiteboard time, Colton? It may be whiteboard time. All right, class, welcome back. Today we're going over how we're gonna destroy the realm of men using the army that Sauron has. All right, so in the movie, one thing you see happens is that Sauron's army rolls up in like one big block and just stops outside of the city. Visually it's impressive. It's pretty sick, right? You get to like look out there and realize, oh my God, we're screwed. The world of men is over. And it's kind of like a similar vein with Helm's Deep where all the Uruk-hai come up in one big block and stop. To the wine mom watching it, it can make sense, right? She probably pictures like big army, castle, makes sense. But to the educated man, to the man that has played any sort of strategy game, you just don't march your entire army up in a big old glob of dudes. It's hard to organize a crowd like that. You gotta cut them up a little bit, give them some maneuverable spaces, keep some cohesion so you can have a good battle plan of things. That being said, it's not as cinematically cool, and all the moving pieces may not make sense to a regular American viewer circa 2000 to 2003 when Lord of the Rings was coming out. So I get it. So a nice part about this scenario is that Gondor did nothing to prepare to defend, unlike what we did in the prior video of how I would defend Gondor or Minas Tirith. They didn't do any trenches, they didn't do anything like that to break up our approach, which is a rookie move. Funny enough, what we'll do is probably dig a trench around the city and have staging points for our different assault groups. The trench is mainly there to help prevent any like suicidal sally that they may do, which could be possible with the steward who sent his own son on a suicidal cavalry charge towards Osgiliath, which made no sense, but we're going to do it nonetheless because we want to eliminate any chance of them succeeding. Them coming out of the city at our 200,000 strong army would be suicidal. Like, they could do some damage, but chances are they're all going to get cut down by our 10,000 orc archers. So there's an interesting dynamic where the guys in Sauron's army, the shot callers, probably already have a good idea of the effective range of any sort of the artillery inside Gondor, so they'd probably want to set up outside of the effective range of that, your main battle line. And probably dig a trench from there, where you have openings, of course, to move your siege towers out of. And for Grond, we can't forget about Grond. If George Washington was alive right now, would he be Republican or a Democrat? No, he would be a big fan of the siege engine Grond from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Now, more on the trench assault thing, even if we're leaving choke points open for our siege engines to move out of, one thing I worry about is that the artillery inside of the city could choke point those spots, right? Say we have an example of 3 here. The catapults could all assign sectors of fire inside the city to say, okay, we know these siege engines are coming out of this choke point, so when they do start to roll, that's where we're going to start shooting at them. Now, that choke point could still be out of the range of the effective fire of the catapult, and then once they get through, they could start to get online and maneuver up and then push at the walls. But even if they were inside the effective range, one thing I was playing with is the idea of using some kind of like plank bridge setup you could lay across the trench and then just roll the siege engine over. That way, if anything does happen, like say if Gandalf does some wizardry magic and blesses a trebuchet inside of Gondor and one of those boulders comes out and hits our siege engine and it clogs up the hole, then that way we can still have some planks in reserve and be like, okay, well, we'll make a bridge right here and push the siege engine across. Like, no big deal. Hello, Bureauphiles from the future, my present, but still your past. I wanted to elaborate on something a little bit more interesting, and that would be how Isengard would also play out in this scenario, but also utilizing some of the technology that was at the Battle of Helm's Deep. One interesting thing that I think we could really use upon and get a good bang for our buck, especially when taking on Minas Tirith, would be the siege equipment that the Uruk-hai had when they were taking on Helm's Deep. They had some very long ladders, they had some regular ladders, and they also had these like siege bolt launchers, which I think is pretty sick. So we could really get a little bit of an edge when we're dealing with the taller walls of Minas Tirith. Now, a problem is I feel I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that the walls of Minas Tirith could be a little too long to make those really work, but who's to say that they couldn't be advantageous for getting around those choke points? Because I'm really thinking, when we're looking at the infantry of Gondor, that outer wall that they're defending in the battle in the movie, we know for a fact that thing's gonna fold pretty quick based on how it's set up. If they were smart whatsoever, they'd already start pulling back pretty much as soon as our siege engines start moving. So they're gonna probably have an easy access to that first layer, because trying to defend that first layer whatsoever is going to be a nightmare for them. So if they pull back just to that first layer of security and then start maximizing on choke points off the rip, it's already going to make things pretty hard. So having the option for the Uruk-hai style siege engines to come into play, I think is going to be very advantageous. The Uruk-hai will probably take up a lot of the slack that Mordor army would have been giving just by sheer skill set of their infantry alone. I don't want to glaze them too hard, but I mean, they're pretty scary. Now, on the topic of Isengard, I actually don't know fully how this is going to play out. And this is kind of an important detail, even though it gets taken over by the Treants. Because in theory, you know, that orc army, the Uruk-hai, could always maybe circle back to Isengard, resupply, and then head over to Minas Tirith, and then those Uruk-hai could handle the Treant problem with the tools that they have at hand. I mean, reestablishing Isengard is going to be a massive challenge because you literally broke a dam and now the whole production line is flooded. You're going to have to pump all that water out, and that's a whole boring logistical nightmare. It's like a cleaner's problem. I don't want to think about that. I want to think about war. I want to think about war. I want to think about violence. I mean, and you don't have electricity. I mean, you got magic, I guess, with the White Wizard. Now, the White Wizard, Saruman, is very interesting to play with because, you know, in theory, Grima Wormtongue could still assassinate him. You know, who's to know how the dice fall there? I don't know. The reason I bring this up is that it's kind of clear that Saruman was a mastermind behind the explosive gunpowder that we see at the Battle of Helm's Deep, which could come in very useful for the Siege of Minas Tirith. In the prior video, it was kind of like, how much gunpowder did they have? I don't know, but if Saruman's still alive to make more, even after the Uruk-hai handled the Treants. The Uruk-hai, you know, it doesn't have to be the whole army. It could be a fraction force where they come back, handle all the Treants, you know, fire arrow them all dead, I guess, or handle them, or maybe the Treants piss off back to the forest and they're like, we won, and then the Uruk-hai show back up and they're like, I guess we need more gunpowder. Saruman's like, in his impervious tower, is like, yeah, dude, here you go. And then they go march off to Minas Tirith with more gunpowder. So that was a scenario I was playing with. What if all of the ring wraiths just bum rushed Gandalf and just killed him off the rip? Yeah, he did the thing in the movie, but it's like, what if they all did and they all landed and just tore him up? Sorry, Gandalf. I mean, it wouldn't be good for us, for the world of men. But for them, it'd be like taking out a key player quick. He was really the one to like kind of re-rally them at the battle. You know, the steward of Gondor is like, abandon your posts, flee for your lives. It's just like, bah. Hey, no, stop that. And then everyone's like, oh, I guess Gandalf's in charge now. Okay. I still love the Citadel guards at the very top when their entire civilization's about to be destroyed. They're still like guarding stuff. Cut this up to make this sound good. Okay. All right, so what we got right here is a rough representation of the infantry on a perimeter outside of Minas Tirith. We have our exterior trench, which is supposed to protect us from the Rohirrim, and then we have kind of like our groups broken up a little bit more neatly for cohesion. And of course, inside this little defensive perimeter, there would be your camps, you'd have your logistics, you'd have things going on, you'd have guys preparing things, artillery positions getting set up for starting to ground down the walls. One thing I would like to do is with these assault groups is take a lot of the numbers we have and organize them in a way that makes sense and will be most advantageous for the assault. Like for instance, if we have our assault group right here, in that assault group you could break up the Uruk-hai infantry, like your heavy duty infantry that would really match the prowess of Gondor's infantry in there, but alongside them you would have archers and other styles of infantry. Maybe you have some Mordor orcs and then you have your regular orcs in there. So once these Uruk-hai can get in there and start getting a foothold, maybe the smaller orcs can start darting around and causing more chaos and finding angles of attack and flanking and just really causing chaos in the battle lines, at least in the first realm. If they do any sort of disciplined fall back throughout the city, then things will start to organize a bit differently and you can have a different plan of attack from there. On the infantry side of things alone, I'm feeling pretty confident. There still is the threat of the cavalry out there, but we do have the 5,000 Haradrim cavalry. Now, funny enough, off the top of my head, I don't ever recall them being there in Peter Jackson's movie. Now, it's here on the list because it's like part of the research, but you just never really hear about it. Now, on the topic of defending against the Rohirrim, one thing that I like to do, and they aren't really shown in the movie, but the Haradrim cavalry, if we do have access to them and they're on the list so we can play with this, they could be as a bulk staging at Minas Tirith with scout riders out searching for the main body of Rohirrim riders. That way, whichever way they show up, you can be like a little bit more prepared, even go find a little bit more advantageous ground to repel them from. And it gives you time to let the big giant elephants know what's up, because having those things to repel cavalry out in the open is gonna be pretty clutch. The giant elephants are a massive game changer. They really felt like they were dominating when they showed up in the movie and only really got nerfed by the dead army, and because Aragorn is dead, then that dead army never shows up. So if the elephants are still in play along with the Haradrim cavalry, those two working together themselves, you have 5,000 cavalry, and you got 18 giant elephants, those giant elephants just sweeping out swaths of Rohirrim cavalry, probably gonna take the day, so I'm not too worried about that. We have 10,000 orc archers, so on the idea of either the assault or the defense, one thing to play with is, how do you want to split them up? Do you want to use them on the assault? Do you want to use them on the defense? Do you want to break them up? Could go either way. Say if we broke them up, 5,000 for assaulting, 5,000 for defense. And a tactic we could use is the main body of Haradrim and Mamelukes all try and kind of like get the Rohirrim to kind of bait them closer to our lines so that the archers can fire into the Rohirrim from the protection on the other side of the trench. Like say if they're on this side and all the Rohirrim are on the outside of the trench, then our archers can start peppering them from that side. Now, if we take them away from the assault, then we maybe lose some firepower suppression ability with those archers on the defense that they could have been used to keep those Gondorian archers' heads down that much more effective. So there's kind of like a which one you want to roll with. And of course, archers don't have unlimited arrows. You would think with the logistical supply train, which we'll get to in a second, that they would probably bring a lot of arrows and like wagons and stuff, but you don't really see a logistical supply train. You just got a bunch of dudes carrying stuff on them and then assaulting Minas Tirith. Now, I was talking about the Haradrim scouts being used for an early warning system. That's if we don't pull off any of the Nazgul air assets that we have that are really OP in this scenario. Flying the area, looking for them to show up, kind of negates the need for the Haradrim cavalry scouts. Not a bad redundancy to have, but those things could just be like, oh, hey, here's the main body. They fly back to the forces and say, hey, they're coming from this way, get everyone ready, and then they fly off again. Pretty no-brainer in my mind. Like them just flying around causing mayhem on the city isn't the worst thing, but it's also not the best use of their talents when you have thousands and thousands of orcs ready to assault. And it's like, all right, yeah, you're gonna scare these dudes and screech a bit, maybe grab a few and fly off, but you have a whole army for that. If you're like a leadership role, it's better that you're doing leadership things, okay? If you have a dragon when no one else does, probably should not risk that thing getting shot full of arrows by Gondor's archers. You should probably be out there, commanding and controlling. Like what you could do is, 9 Nazguls flying around, so you could take 3 of them and be the commanders of 3 different assault groups. That leaves you the Witch King, the head honcho. Then you have you still got 5 other Nazgul you could use. So if you want to use them, then yeah, be my guest. But I really feel like they should be in a more of a leadership up high role. Hell, maybe even send a Nazgul strike group to go try and kill Gandalf or something. I don't know. If any of your girlfriends or wives are somehow hearing my voice while watching this, I am so sorry, but your lover is a nerd. You probably already knew that. I guess really with the spare Nazgul that we have, we could use them to target their siege engines and try and disable those, so that way we don't have any hiccups with our siege engines getting hit by any boulders or stuff like that. So we can do that. That's fine. I'll allow it. Now, circling back to the assault groups, yet again, a rough representation of what we have. I was playing with the idea of how I'd even organize those groups and what I would do to get the best squeeze from them. Would we have the Uruk-hai be up front? That way they could directly address any sort of Gondor infantry. Or do we have them be at the rear, our most gun-ho guys, our most, ready to get in the action, not scared, and then they can drive the more timid orcs into the blades, soaking up the Gondor's, manpower? Or can we have the Uruk-hai at the back of the formation, kind of like herding the smaller orcs forward? That way, you could tire out Gondor's infantry that much more on the initial assault. Because swinging a sword, you're in heavy armor, it's not like you have ammunition and a gun. It's like you are the ammunition. You're eventually going to get tired from killing so many little orcs, and then all of a sudden, the big Uruk-hai busts through, and you're like now gassed. That's not a bad route. And then you're also taking arrow fire from those assault groups of the orc archers that are attached to it, so you have to worry about kind of protecting yourself, and then maybe you get shot in the arm with an arrow. Now one of your arms is down, you're just having to fight off a big Uruk-hai that's trying to eat you and cut you in half. A lot of fun ideas to play with. You kind of go either way. I'm gonna leave that one up to you when you're like in the shower later and you're thinking about how this YouTuber has some good points, but I probably could have done this better. That's what I want you to take away from this. When it comes to the army, just about any approach besides just rolling up and then starting the assault is a better way to go. The biggest thing you'd have to worry about after you come up with any sort of decent plan that wasn't in Peter Jackson's movie portrayal would be worrying about your logistics. Because if you're committing to a siege, it's probably going to be a longer affair and not just an assault. In this scenario, the Rohirrim are being led by Éomer. King Theoden is dead, along with all the other key players in Helm's Deep after we defeated them in the last video. So Éomer is going to roll up to Gondor and realize, oh crap, what do? They have 2 trenches, at least, one interior where they're keeping in Gondor, one exterior to keep us out. It's a pretty well-defended camp, and there are way more adversaries to worry about. Any cavalry charge is nullified, any effective cavalry charge is nullified trying to get into their flank. And then, on top of that, even if you do get in, you're fighting through thousands and thousands of orcs that are going to slow you down and eventually dismount you and kill you after you lose any steam. Your horses are going to get tired, you're going to get tired, and then you're probably going to eventually die. You could make a dent, right? Say, out of that cavalry army you kill, 2, 5 guys. It's not enough to save Gondor. What's the next best option? What's the next best option? Disrupting the logistical supply train that is feeding that sieging army. How do we stop that as the assaulting force? Well, you gotta divide and conquer. Historically, how would armies survive over long campaigns? They bring food with you, you have wagon trains, you could live off the land, you could raid, you could forage, you could do stuff like that. There are side effects to certain things, right? If you're an attacking army in a foreign land and you're stealing everyone's food, that could lead to guerrilla fighters. That could lead to them even scorching their own lands to deny you food. In the book, the Pelennor Fields are all supposed to be like a rich farmland. In the movie, it's all just like a desert grassland. So there's no food or grain there to live off of, which means that Mordor's army would have to have some sort of baggage train to supply the hundreds of thousands of guys sieging. I don't know the exact distance between Minas Tirith and Osgiliath because we've captured Osgiliath already. So it's like, 20, 30-ish miles? That's not that far in the grand scheme of campaigns as far as things go, but it's a lot of space to cover when you have thousands of Rohirrim cavalry out there that can attack that supply train. Some sources say that it's like 15 miles. I'm getting mixed numbers across the board. Now, defending this stretch of land, the unknown number, whether it's 15 to 30 miles, becomes a challenge. How do we approach this? We're gonna have to break up this army, and we have a lot of guys to do this, thankfully. So earlier I was saying we could have the Haradrim cavalry on standby at the siege army to protect it from the cavalry. We have the trench, so really it's not that big of a deal. They could be on a more of a roaming, we call an audible, make them more roam, and we could have the Nazgul air assets constantly spotting the Rohirrim. If that's the case, then you kind of just walk in that cavalry force and they could take on the Rohirrim and approach it that way. Once you spot the cavalry, you can then address it for the most part. On the elephants, we could even call another audible and not even use them for combat in that instance. Maybe we even use them for baggage train purposes. You could probably fit a lot of stuff on the back of that elephant if you load it up and then march it to the camps. Could save you a lot of logistical manpower off of those 18 Mamelukes that you have. Instead of a fighting elephant, you have a big old carriage elephant. The dudes may not be stoked depending on their culture. Maybe they're big I want to fight, I want to die. But if you're all right, hey, these Rohirrim cavalry are gonna pepper you with arrows and keep a safe distance and eventually kill your giant elephant. What if we just switch things up and you carry some protein to our guys that are sieging Minas Tirith? There could be a big problem in this army of ego. The orc ego is very I want to fight and I want to kill, and they don't really care too much about the little details that go into making you not starve. There could be that. Now, getting into some more numbers, how much food will we need to supply a 200,000 strong army? We use an MRE as a baseline. The average MRE weighs 21 ounces. If we do a bit of quick math, we can find out that our daily care packages will on aggregate weigh around 480 metric tons, or about 1,058,000 pounds, or 530 tons imperial. God bless America. This does sound like a lot, but our elephants aren't exactly normal elephants. Out of all the elephants in our reality, African elephants can carry the most, which is about 10 tons. That's a lot of weight. Is that real? I want to believe. African elephants, being the largest elephants that we have, can carry like 800 to 1,500 pounds based off their body weight. If we cut the average, maybe it's like 1,000 pounds, which is still a lot. They're not necessarily pack animals, but you could load them up and rig them. If we do the same with the Mamluks, we could probably move a lot of logistics. And a nice benefit is that if the siege goes on over time and orc casualties are mounting, that the orcs are known to be cannibalistic, so they can always just eat their own, which should help out if there's any sort of food shortages on the line.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
If the premier Urukai are getting hungry, yeah, we're gonna sacrifice some less capable orcs so we can feed our prime fighters. We do a little bit of cannibalism, but it's okay, because they're orcs, it's not a big deal. Now, say the Nazgul do spot the Rohirrim, and they are trying to go after our supply train in any way, shape, or form. I worry that the Haradrim cavalry is not going to live up to the quality of the Rohirrim cavalry, so we're going to have to mix in some forces that aren't going to be as fast on foot. They're going to catch up to the Rohirrim. So ideally, we take some, orcs and kind of throw them at the Rohirrim. They're probably going to die, but it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. We don't need all 80,000 of them besieging Minas Tirith. We can definitely do with like 30,000 of them on rear guard duty, maybe even half of them, 40,000 of them. We outnumber the defenders drastically, so it's okay if we pull them off the line a bit. Yet again, if they die, we'll bring their bodies back to the Uruk-hai. That's one thing I forgot to cover, is that because Aragorn is dead, thanks to our army winning at Helm's Deep, the army of the dead never shows up, meaning that the boatmen can now freely use their logistical supply train to even reinforce the troops at Minas Tirith. So now we have two supply trains, one that can't even get stopped by the Rohirrim. So we have a whole river we can use. It's kind of sealing the fate of Middle-earth if Aragorn dies. He can't bring that army of the dead back and save the day. We're gonna take Minas Tirith if there's no army of the dead to stop us. We could really carve it up however we want, get into the nitty-gritty and the minutia, and the fighting on the street levels will be intense and ferocious and fierce. Gondor is gonna put up a very ferocious final stand, but it's not gonna be enough to stop the literal orc horde that's coming in for them. There's also these dragons out there that are picking them up from above. You have these trolls in the city causing chaos. The assault groups are doing their job, getting leverage inside of the city. It's going to be a nightmare for him. There still is hope for Middle-earth in the hands of Frodo with the One Ring to rule them all. But a big reason Frodo and Sam succeeded is because they were distracted thanks to Aragorn showing up outside of the Black Gates. Aragorn's dead. Gondor is destroyed. There's no distraction force to take the eye off of any potential infiltration into Mordor. All of those leftover orcs in there, potentially are going to spot them, and it really ruins the chance. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it really ruins the chances. So much hung on Helm's Deep, and the fact that we won at Helm's Deep pretty much opens the door to the rest of Middle-earth. And that's really, in a nutshell, how we destroy Minas Tirith and destroy Gondor. I appreciate you guys stopping in. I appreciate you guys watching. I got nothing else for you. Godspeed.